Uh, Hi, everybody. Thank you all for making it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Neha Kumar, and I'm SIGCHI VP at large. And in this role, I lead and manage global community support mechanisms. So, looking at the Gary Marsden Travel Awards, the SIGCHI Development Fund, the Voices of SIGCHI box series, and such. And in my day job, I'm currently an associate professor at Georgia Tech, where I do research at the intersection of HCI and global development. And I'm generally well employed in the US, but India is home for me, and this is where I am at present, where it is 2 a.m. And with regards to reviewing and mentorship, I want to say that I see them as related and crucial to the overall well-being of our community. And having benefited from both nurturing reviews and supporting mentors, I think that this is really how we grow and become better at doing HCI. And among several mentors that I deeply value, one of them is certainly Shawan Barzel, and I will let her introduce herself now.
Thank you very much, Neha. I'm Shawan Bartel. I'm professor in College of Information Sciences and Technology at Penn State University. Like Neha, I'm also vice president at large on the SIGCHI Executive Committee. In addition to working with my colleagues on the Executive Committee on various initiatives on inclusion and equity, I also chair SIGCHI Cares. This is a committee that is a resource for anyone who experiences harassment or discrimination at our professional events. In my 2-year tenure on the executive committee, the topics of reviewing and mentoring come up time and again. And that is one of the reasons that Neha and I decided to feature these topics in our Equity Roundtable series. On a more personal level, with a background in the humanities, I was naturally anxious about how to position my work in HCI. I had a series of false starts when I first started out, and I owe many in the field who mentor me and encourage me to stay true to who I am, and also leverage my humanist background to make contributions in HCI. Many who gave me the confidence to participate and thrive in this research community. Also, I cannot underscore the importance of mentorship enough. And I look forward to more conversations about these topics with you all today and beyond. Neha and I just want to give a big shout out to Kale and Miriam for volunteering their time to moderate and to sketch note taking this session, and many members, our SIGCHI EC colleagues, who are deeply committed to equity and inclusion, who have facilitating a lot of these conversations over the past months or so, and so that we can come together as a community to listen and learn to be better serve the community. So just some promotion about our future events. We will be doing more of these equity sessions. The next one will be on infrastructures for equity, and that will be on April 9th at 8 a.m. EDT. That's 2 p.m. CEST and 5:30 p.m. India. And we hope to see many of you in that session as well. With that, we're gonna hand over the session to Kel, our moderator. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here today.
Thanks, Shawan. So yeah, I'm your recurring moderator, Kale Passmore, pronouns he, him, or they, them. And I'm very much not a deep fake or robot, no matter how many times I repetitiously show up here saying the same things. I'm coming to you from the still unceded and snowy homeland of the Dene, Lakota, Dakota, Cree, and Saulteaux peoples, as well as many additional First Nations peoples and the Métis, which would be Treaty 6, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I like to situate myself a little bit here since I'm occupying a position of relative power as moderator. I'm a non-binary HCI researcher and knowledge worker with a range of privileges, from presenting as white, male, with my disabilities largely invisible. I've been a mentee, I've been a mentor, I've been a reviewer for almost a decade and a half here. And that means at times I've failed miserably to manage the power implicit to these positions, to these relationships. And I've been on the opposite end of that. I'm maintaining those relationships with mentees where I've been successful. So I apologize in advance. I'm going to really quickly cover the code of conduct in brief. It's available in full at a link we'll post in the chat right now. And while I do, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. If comfortable, provide your pronouns, location, and something you'd like others to know about you. That goes for whenever you offer your illustrious wisdom. We just ask you state your name, affiliation, and pronouns out loud. You can add pronouns to your username by right-clicking the box containing your face in the Zoom window and selecting rename. So yeah, once again, this is not required, but it is encouraged. As a roundtable, anyone is free to offer their critiques, solutions, or to share their experiences at any point in time. This is a collaborative discussion of issues and potential solutions around reviewing and mentorship within the SIGCHI context. And I'm just here to keep us on track and facilitate as equitable and constructive a dialogue as possible. So, you know, the session will be recorded. By attending the roundtable with this time, your consent is ongoing. Any participation, so questions, comments, etc., are also being recorded. For the same reasons of privacy and consent, we ask that you not share content from the talk on social media. We'll post this talk in full with additional accessibility options afterward. If posting after the event, hashtag SIGCHI and hashtag EquityTalk will be your hashtags of choice. If you absolutely must discuss potentially harmful, stressful, or sensitive topics, we ask you provide a content warning. We currently have a live cart and ASL interpreter. Everyone say hello to Allison. And if you require additional services, please just message me or another organizer. So we encourage constructive criticism and critique in this space. Our time together serves to highlight the incredibly complicated interactions between individual experiences and systemic policies. These are sources of ongoing frustration for many and joy for many. While these frustrations are valid, I'd like to remind everyone here that we're an internationally diverse group of humans. So be patient with one another. Show sensitivity to anyone who has requested the floor. Keep aware of how much time and space you take up and that others may need a moment of silence to collect themselves before speaking. Be critical, but be constructively so. Be kind, be supportive. Not everyone is here with the same education level or culture when it comes to social issues, social justice, or matters of identity. Everyone has equal access to these communities or to that knowledge. So there may be times when identifying words or phrases are insensitive or just don't feel right to you. If these come up, take each other in good faith, offer a quick correction, and refocus on the topic of the moment. I'd like you all to remember that people's lived experiences are not up for debate. And in the event of harassment, discrimination, or any additional needs, accessibility or otherwise, please message moderator, that's me, this very real fleshy human, Neha or Xiaowen. We also have Slido linked in the chat right about now-ish for posting and upvoting questions as a secondary way to engage. As this event is striving for equitable dialogue and is not a Q&A, we have to balance comments from the speakers, from the comments and from Slido. So any questions we don't address or get around to from Slido, we will post to the discussion in the Equity Talks Discord channel and the preceding blog post. So that's it. With the house kept, and as this dialogue moves forward, I'd like to start us off by planting two things in the back of your mind. The first is a thread woven through both previous talks, applying to aspects of reviewing and mentorship here as well. The complications and oppressions that we face are not experienced equally. However, solutions to these oppressive practices and norms are to the benefit of everyone. The second was a comment brought up by Melissa, Stacy, and actually several others in our first talk, who commented, relationships, not mentorship. However you personally define these terms, this comment calls us to reflect on the power we wield as mentors, reviewers, and scholars in relationship with one another. We're brought to reflect on our motivations in teaching, review, and research, and to take account of the relationship between why we are doing a thing and the emotional, experiential, and social consequences of doing that thing. Reviewing is a mentoring process. It's a relationship with other researchers, with society as a whole, with knowledge. So I'll open this up to anyone in attendance who has some starting thoughts for us. What are some of the challenges to a positive reviewing process you've experienced, and how might mentorship be leveraged to address those challenges? Feel free to raise your hand whenever you'd like to speak. Molly, would you like to go first?
Yeah, hi. My name is Molly. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a grad student, a fifth-year grad student at UC Berkeley. I figure out how to lower my hand. Okay. And I have a lot of thoughts. I've added a lot of comments in the Slido, so I'll start with one, which is, it seems like one of the problems is not having enough reviewers. But it seems to me like a really low-hanging fruit there is why aren't authors automatically signed up to review when they submit a paper? Instead, it's like this weird two-step process where you like commit to review, but then later you also have to go and physically sign up. And I forget sometimes. Seems like that could be streamlined. Number two, there's often an epistemological mismatch between reviewers and the papers that they're assigned to review. I've never been an AC, so I've not seen that process behind the scenes, but I spoke with a friend who was an AC, and she described a little bit about how challenging that process is. So I have a little bit of insight into, the challenges there. I'm sure other people are more knowledgeable about that, but it seems like there are also some kind of like low-hanging, kind of obvious things that we could do to make that a little bit better of a match, which would not only improve the reviewing process for everyone, but also just make it a more fun and equitable process for people. And I can go into more detail about the specific quotes from the review that I got that are basically direct quotes out of the unofficial reviewing guide about bias in reviewing. That would be nice to avoid in the future.
If anyone would like to respond to that out of the gate, we'll start there before maybe going on to something else. Tess, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I think I grapple a lot with your second point, Molly, with the question. Oh, first of all, I'm Tess Tannenbaum, she, her. I'm at UC Irvine, and I'm also on the UC as the VP of Publications. And my background is in the humanities and digital media studies, and it's not in computing. I've done little bits of technical work, but I'm not a positivist, and I'm not a computing researcher, and so I often feel like a fish out of water in the SIGCHI reviewing processes. And the challenge of how we create a reviewing environment that is supportive and constructive, that is also capable of encompassing the breadth of disciplines that are covered underneath the banner of SIGCHI, it's both our greatest opportunity and our greatest challenge, as far as I'm concerned. It's extraordinary that somebody like me found a home in HCI and found a community where my ideas and my work resonated enough with other people to find a place and make a contribution. It's certainly, I wasn't trained at HCI, and yet there's enough room inside of our community for perspectives like mine. It also means that I am perennially struggling with the fact that the vast majority of the people reading my work don't have the same epistemological perspective that I have. They don't have the same methodological grounding that I have. And this is the sort of the tension of our community, that I love that I'm in conversation with all of these perspectives, trying to find a way to position my ideas within a conversation that holds all of these different methodologies and expectations makes me a better scholar. But it also means I have to fight a lot harder to articulate the value of the work that I do. And it's exhausting. I agree, it's exhausting. And it can especially be overwhelming and disheartening when you're a young scholar trying to find a place in a field and you feel like the field doesn't get you, is hostile to you, is hostile to new ideas. and I don't like, I'm not sure that I'm coming with any solutions aside from saying I hear you and I experience this. And I see it as both an opportunity because I get to be here and I get to have these conversations. And also one of the challenges that we as a community face, especially because the reviewing process is the place where we are collectively negotiating what it means to make a contribution to knowledge. It's where we're collectively asserting our standards, our criteria, our ideas about what knowledge is or should be. And so it's the place where we're doing the most mentoring of each other. And it's the place where we're really establishing what it means for what HCI is, what our identity is as a field.
Molly, did you want to go back?
Oh, someone else should talk instead of me. Mariam has her hand up.
Miriam, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for passing that on, Molly. Mariam, I'm at LUMS, she, her. Just very quickly, I think I'd like to tie in what Molly said and what Teresa said back to mentorship. You know, for me, for many, many years, as being part of the CHI community, the HCI community, I think it's a little better with CSCW, but with CHI particularly, I've always felt that the reviewing process is a fight, almost, which is a word that Teresa used, and it's overly critical. And the goal seems to be to reject and not mentor. And I wonder if there's a way to shift it from sort of looking to reject papers and looking to reject work towards mentoring that work. And so whenever I've had the privilege almost of having my papers shepherded, it has been such a joyful experience. And so I've always wondered why there isn't more of that within our spaces.
Yeah, I think everyone so far is fantastically highlighting that, you know, the epistemological mismatch, the sort of competitiveness in a lot of the reviewing processes at play can feel really oppressive and exclusionary. And not only that, it's not just like an academic interdisciplinary issue with epistemological mismatch. It's just as much a cultural issue as well. But Tammy, I see that you have your hand raised, and then we'll jump over to Slido for a couple seconds after that.
Oh, hi. Oh, yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Tammy Clegg. I am at the University of Maryland. She, her, and hers are my pronouns. I just wanted to follow up with that conversation. I think one of the things in what you were saying, Miriam, might be that like sometimes what happens is, especially with ACs, is that you're given so many reviews and you're also still working on all these other things that you find these kind of quick ways, or sometimes people find quick ways to like go through papers. And then that's when you get to the like, you know, oh, they didn't understand this or they didn't understand that, right? But they were just looking for these sort of like checkpoints or what have you. And I feel like that's when you can really get into, you know, more of the sort of biases and like, what am I not seeing and that kind of thing, which may be why when you had the shepherding experience, right, where the AC only had like 1 or 2 other papers and they had a little bit more time to kind of focus on you, that, you know, that was maybe a little bit more alleviated, and there's a little bit more room for conversation. And I really love the idea too, Molly, to ask people right when they're submitting, like, yeah, you submitted this paper, so now come and review some. So that's all.
Thanks so much. Sheena.
Great. Okay, great, thanks. So I completely agree. I see like Molly was shaking her head and I was also like shaking my head vehemently, like these are my experiences as well. And thinking about some of the issues in the current review process, really, I think it's already been said, but I think even beyond the epistemological match, there's also what happens with people who work on with non-traditional populations or populations that are outside of and or take a stance that's around the creation of technology or not, right? The non-creation of technology, which a lot of my work, it doesn't really focus on the building of the tool more so than the use of. And so you get these challenges around that. And I think that for when engaging in HCI, I think many times I've received reviews and there's been no process necessarily to and other than the rebuttal, right? The rebuttal is, and it's not valid if you've gotten reviews that are clearly have bias in them and or have racism in them and or has sexism in them, et cetera, right? And so I think one of the main issues is like the process itself. It doesn't lend itself to how are those things going to be addressed and rectified. And I think that, I take an approach that, even if the reviewer, it didn't mean to come off this way, this is what this is, right? This is what it is. It's racist, it's sexist, or whatever these comments are. And so even when pointing out even more recently in one of my reviews to the AC, there was nothing addressed, right? And so, and I think there should be a process, and I think someone probably put it in, and I have a lot of screens up, but I think someone put it in the chat about there should be a better process for that. And I think that's one of the things that we have to begin to think about, which is like, what is the process that for the reviewer's sake, so even if the review it wasn't intentional, so they can learn, and then also for the person who spent all this time on all of this work, and because there was a bad match, and or because there was just like, you're bringing in information from other fields which have not, that we're not necessarily always aware of when you're pulling frameworks and pulling stances from work that has been established in sociology or psychology or whomever, whatever field you're coming from. And those things are automatically rejected because it hasn't been situated in HCI before. And I think we just have to think a little bit more about the process on the reviewer side, to how do they review papers that are non-traditional, and then also how do we rectify when people do have these negative experiences with the review process. And again, I sound like this, I'm not trying to be, it's not that I'm just saying I got a bad review. I'm not talking about those things, right? Where the paper wasn't up to par. I'm talking about comments that were clearly were problematic, right, in the review process.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sheena. I think also, like, I'm going to take a moment to read through some of the comments because they're echoing what you're saying and point to, these instances not just being one-offs or, just your experience either. Kata had added, I'm Kata Spiel from TU Wine, and I once received a review telling me the author is too critical of the field of HCI and its methods. I feel like it's a badge of honor. Nazanin had said, I won't tell that story, but I had a shepherded paper once, and the shepherd clearly tried very hard to make my work about their work. I stood my ground, but just saying that shepherding can be a way of control and exercising power, and we need accountability and some form of quality control. Vino had also added in the comments, yes, I would encourage conference organizers to have guidelines for shepherding to figure out what the shepherding process is meant to improve for the benefit of the community. And Geraldine had added to this, the explicit instructions to reviewers /ACs is to look for reasons to accept. The challenge is how we get this to play out in the moments of reviewing. How can we continually remind each other if on the committee and ask the questions again to help shift the conversations? And I think these bring us actually to one of the Slido questions that was posted, which was why are complaints on reviewers not addressed by the ACM? I'll turn it over because I see Nupur has a hand up.
Thank you. I'm Nupur. I am a postdoc at NYU. I just want to add 2 quick points to the last speaker's point. One is that, in fact, like I've heard these things so many times before where my advisors or senior scholars have tried to just tell me that this isn't personal, that I shouldn't take a rejection as sort of an indictment of my work. But it's obviously really hard to take that coming from like global South geographies or writing about things where I am in the middle of them, for someone to tell me, don't take it personally, this is just what happens to like knowledge that is at the margins of this field. My only problem, or something that I want the ACM community to broadly discuss, is when does this stop being the case, right? Like, even if someone tells you that, well, you're just a sociologist writing within HCI, um, I wonder if there's a discussion possible around whose imagination of HCI, or like whose community it was originally. Because I honestly, like, again, just like Tess, I'm not from this community, but I just happened to land up in an information school, and then this became a great sort of venue to publish and get my work out quickly. And I wear my badge of honor as the fact that I've never had a paper accepted at CHI, but have like 2 or 3 papers at CSCW. And I take that as indication just of the fact that I feel like there's something going on there. So I don't know, make of it what you will, but I feel like there's a larger discussion waiting to happen. And I did hear at one of the town halls that happened after the conference, where there was some tension around the systems track. And I wonder if that also is a clue to like an original community around which this conference or these conferences were centered, and whether something has shifted fundamentally.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of why we're hoping this is one of many conversations to come around this, especially since, like I'm seeing in Slido as well, credit to CSCW for having a detailed appeals process. Why isn't this standard across all conferences? What about the SIGCHI submission and review policy? And how can ACs be empowered to push back against rude comments and reviews? I found this to be a challenging paper to read and review, is not constructive. Michael, I believe you had something you wanted to add to the conversation here.
Well, I want to get out of the way of people who want to speak to what Nupur said, but if no one does, then I'll bring up, then I'll respond to something that came earlier, but I don't want to take us off topic.
Perfect. I'm seeing in the chat, Molly has added, as a reviewer, I don't get explicit instructions to review. I just get an email with the link to accept or not, and no reminder when I actually start reviewing. We need more reminders during the process in the actual PCS site, for example. Also, ACs could do more here. Instead of just sending a brief email to say, please discuss, they could explicitly shape the conversation in different ways. And Priya has added, regarding ACs responding to negativity in reviews, I once saw a CSCW AC ask a reviewer to revise language that was somewhat disparaging. And once I suggested a CHI AC revise their language in a meta review to be a little more generous, and they did. I offer this not to suggest that I've done something good, but to normalize the idea that we as reviewers / ACs can invite and encourage people to think, encourage people to revise their language / rethink their ideas in the review process. Is there anyone else who wanted to add onto this before we keep taking a couple more steps forward? Then I think, Michael, the floor is yours for the moment.
Thank you. I'm responding actually to something that Geraldine said. I think several other people in the chat, and I agree. So this is not a disagreement, it's a discussion of tensions. We want to find reasons to accept papers. That is true. Within a committee, we sometimes can work very hard toward that. And I won't go into details, but I was on a committee recently which worked really hard to do that, and we were slapped pretty badly for having insufficient standards or not doing a quality job because we accepted a greater percentage of papers than was the norm. And so I'm left with kind of a quandary there about where do we need to be telling people about the need to look for reasons to accept. It may not be among the people on this call. It may be in the broader community, which was, as I said, pretty unhappy with us for taking more papers than they thought we should have done. And I don't know what to do about that, but I sure wish I did.
Well, I'm sad that we aren't able to completely resolve issues around epistemology, pedagogy, practices around shepherding and sort of culture shaping in the review process. Emmeline?
Yeah, just to add to Michael's comment, I think what I've seen recently as an AC is also that we're not necessarily very good at conveying how standards of what we considered good, like articles that we agree to publish, evolve. And I'm thinking this might be especially the case in design, where the papers we wrote 5 years ago are just not the same as the one we are writing now. I'm not sure how it changed for other committees, but like for another example, we are for sure a lot more attentive to how qualitative research methods are explained in papers now. And so we wouldn't accept now papers that, again, were accepted a few years ago. But for students, they model the papers on previous publications, and if they have not had that support from their teachers and supervisors and so on, they might not be able to they don't understand why the standards have changed. And I think that's something that maybe committees could make clearer, like what are the kind of papers that we accept at this committee? Why do we accept these kind of papers? What are the kind of requirements? And making these agreements that tend to happen in the in informal discussions. Like, I don't think that we should accept this paper because thematic analysis is not described, something that is formalized, and this can create consensus and help with what Michael is describing, these disagreements around standards. And I think a lot of people would be against that, because that requires a lot more work and actually limits our flexibility. But on the other hand, that might lessen the inequalities that we are perceiving.
I think that's a great point. Just at CHI this year, we're seeing a lot more, meta papers or papers about the status of everything in HCI. Naomi had said in chat, speaking of CHI reviews, I've always thought it problematic when reviewers lowered their score when authors did not address the issues pointed out by reviewers. Some reviewers lower their scores when the authors do not answer to all their concerns, but this has emotional consequences. I think there should be some kind of rule or mechanism to allow reviewers to only raise their scores after a rebuttal. Geraldine had added, how do we make all of the instructions to busy reviewers and another creative ideas we might have easier to access and digest? We have guidelines, but I know many people are too busy to read them, and also they know what reviewing is and don't need to review them. Susan has added to that. There's a huge tension between keeping up the brand as rigorous, for example, reject, versus encouraging scholars, for example, accept. At CHI, the former is key. Firaz, I believe you have something you wish to share.
Yeah, hi, this is Firaz Peer from University of Kentucky. Just to follow up on what was just said about standardizing the process for acceptance, and I'm sorry if some of you might already know what I'm talking about, so I apologize in advance for bringing it up here. So I was recently on a review committee where one of the ACs mentioned that the reviewer said, if this was a CHI paper, I would have reduced my score of the paper, which for me was like, wait, what does that mean? What's this? So the reviewer obviously has this rubric in place, right? So CHI is rigorous in a certain way, and they can only accept papers which are at a certain standard, which I guess just the reviewer knows. Or I don't know if such something like this is available for the maybe students or others who are not aware of this sort of rubric. So yeah, I don't know how widespread this is, and others who've maybe been part of CHI more often might be able to speak to this more, but that in a way blew my mind that a reviewer like that could say something like that. So yeah, that's all I had to say. Thanks.
Yeah, Yolanda had added in the chat, yes, I think we have to acknowledge that there is this premise that CHI is the top tier conference for HCI research. As such, the idea is that only the top papers are accepted to HCI. The question for me is who decided that CHI should be the premier conference for HCI? I'm saying this from the perspective of who decides what is deemed acceptable work and the criteria for doing so. This gets at the power structure that defines the review process. There are some reviewers who view themselves as gatekeepers and as such will intentionally set out to not accept certain papers. I'm not saying that CHI is not a good conference. I'm saying that these power structures benefit those whose work has been published repeatedly in such a way that they become the experts and in some cases gatekeepers. Such power structures perpetuate the cycle of authors whose work is continuously rejected, and this has to be acknowledged and dealt with. Miriam added, it seems a lot of the concerns that are being raised have to do with reviewer quality and experience. So perhaps it's important to think about ways to mentor PhD students starting their journey who will eventually become ACs and reviewers. In an earlier session, one mentioned shadow PCs. Kashyap, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to build upon that. And in my opinion, first of all, sorry, my camera's off. It's late here, so I won't put you through that. But yeah, as I was saying, I think this label of CHI being a rigorous conference with high standards is anyway somehow made up. We have this arbitrary acceptance rate of 25%, but it's somewhat a well-known fact that about 50% of the papers that are in this middle region essentially are a coin toss. So they could go either way and you wouldn't know. There wouldn't be a way to actually judge this. So one way forward might be to actually consider thinking about drastically increasing the acceptance rate to something like, say, even 50%, and find other ways to judge quality of paper than just see whether they're accepted or not. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you. I'm seeing a lot of +1 Yolandas in the comments here. So I also have, to Michael's point, I don't want to detract from the reviewing/mentoring focus of today's session, but I think this dispiriting focus on keeping the acceptance rate low is connected to the increasing numbers of papers that people are submitting, the sort of growth of HCI within this community, which of course gets at the broader publish or perish pressure cooker in which many of us live. Perhaps we collectively also need to submit fewer papers, which is a comment they offer as a half joke. I see Nazanin. Have I pronounced that correctly?
Yeah, hi, I go by Naz. I am at the University of Michigan. And a common thread that I'm hearing and from people is this kind of, there's people don't know how to do reviews well. We should mentor them and we should kind of there should be guidelines, clear guidelines, more clear guidelines. But I wonder if part of the problem that we're having also is the lack of accountability, aside from maybe someone will catch something and then it will look bad for the types of kind of reviewers that Yolanda was kind of talking about. So I think I'm wondering if we could also have a conversation now or at some point about what structures might we be able to put in place so that the types of gatekeeping or harmful or power play type AC or review behavior doesn't get rewarded and doesn't get doesn't get to happen. Because I'm sure if you ask any number of people like on this call and they would probably say, yeah, like gosh, like I hope that person doesn't review my paper because like that's what they do, right? So, but there is really no, there's really nothing to do about it, right? Like I mean, if there is, I don't know what it is, but I think that's an important kind of issue with the whole process of reviewing and getting feedback on work.
Thank you. Naomi, you had something you wish to add?
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe I should introduce first, right? My name is Naomi Yamashita from NTT Research Labs, Japan, pronouns she, her. I wanted to talk a little bit about mentoring from the perspective of a non-native English speaker. So one idea for, I think, well, there's a lacking number of mentors. And one idea, I believe, for increasing the mentor pool is to improve matching between mentor and mentees so that, you know, I think they can discuss in their first language. And this way it's far more efficient and reduces burden on each, like on both ends, and also has potential to strengthen the relationships. And well, as of my experience, I was hesitant to take on like mentor role because of two reasons. First, mentoring in English requires like more than double effort than mentoring in Japanese. And second, I'm not sure if, you know, say junior reviewers, PhD students studying, for example, in the US would want guidance from a researcher in other countries. So, I mean, yeah, what I'm trying to say is I believe introducing a matching mechanism that takes geographical location or language into account would motivate more people to sign up as mentors. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It was actually something that also came up in that first equity talk around regionalism. Tayana, I believe you had something you wanted to say, and then I'm going to turn back to the comments briefly.
Okay, thank you. I'm Tayana from Brazil, from University from Amazonas. I'm in the middle of the Amazon, really. Okay, so I'd like to join Naomi with the open on an open discussion about this, because we are talking a lot about CHI, and we all know how hard is it to join the global north perspective, to be accepted in the global north. But in the global south, we struggle too, and we have different issues, and we need to discuss them too. Here in Brazil, we had a different perspective last year. In Brazil, we have a young community, a very active one. Soraya is our chair in our chapter here in Brazil. And last year, we have our symposium, our HCI symposium. And we had a different perspective. We try a different thing for the review process, because we have a problem here. As Tess was saying, we have very different backgrounds. We have lots of young researchers. And so how can we do to do better? Because we have very different levels of reviews. And our Brazilian community is not a very hater community, saying that we are so hard. No, not everyone is hard in the reviews, but sometimes there is lack of good criticism too. So we start to implement a rebuttal process. And the secret or the key is not the rebuttal per se. I know that many authors, myself as an author, sometimes we think, oh, I will not write this rebuttal. I will not even try. It's not worth. But in the perspectives of the reviewers, sometimes it's a very good thing to have to discuss before the rebuttal and after the rebuttal. And it was great for our community. It was a good point. It was like a training, like a hands-on training, not a course, not a mentorship. it was, okay, so everyone here and everyone knows everyone in our community, but okay, we need to discuss. And many of the younger researchers were a little bit shy in, in the beginning, because it's not so easy to start talking with your peers, sometimes with people that you admire a lot, but they learned a lot. And not only the younger researchers, some of many others too. And it was a beautiful process, a lot of work to poke everybody. I was one of the co-chair, the other one was Isabella Gasparini, a great friend, and she was great too in the process. We divided everyone and poke everyone. And so I want to share this process with you. I know that rebuttal process is so common ground in the global north, but sometimes we need to discuss in the associate conference what we can do to improve, to train, to educate, or even to have a common language. I do think that the unofficial guide is great. It's great when it points out the bias and so on, but sometimes we need even more basic training, even discussion. So good to have, and to have these points of mandatory discussions were great for us as a community. We are trying this year again, the chairs are keeping the process for now. Maybe it's a good thing to try another.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've got such, similar comments actually posted in Slido here, where I wonder if issues with reviews and mentoring in/through reviews isn't a much larger issue of structuring HCI education. So again, we're talking about shaping the culture here, the cultures, and letting those inform, going back to some of our talks about regionalism. We have how can A's be scaffolded better? New A's to Kai were overloaded with 15 papers. That is ridiculous. And definitely, it's hard to get unusual populations recognized as legit. It is especially true for scholars in the global south, also for the circumpolar north. And because I'm seeing in chat, a lot of people are plus wanting Nick. I'm just gonna go back to that comment there. I would like to see more non-US Euro mentoring US/Euro researchers, or at least having a chance to comment, because it's all too often a one-way perspective of what counts / how to develop. And of course, that brings us back into questions about, different types of colonialism, even further epistemological mismatch. We also had a comment from Geraldine saying, have also seen this checking in by SCs and ACs to help foster more constructive tone in reviews. As paper chair, we've also gone through and read all meta reviews as an additional sense check and have asked for people to reconsider tone, etc. Kata has said, I honestly don't think any acceptance rate goal is helpful to anything related to research, but that might be me. And Geraldine added, regarding low rates, I've never really heard GCs, TPCs setting a limit. They always say every paper should be accepted on its merit, and then deal with how they manage limited space, rooms, time to include all these papers. For example, discussions like maybe shorter talk times or some as posters. However, many times, even we still often end up around some acceptance number in the 20s. Given that we have about 10 minutes left, is there anyone who hasn't offered their experiences or thoughts that might like to speak for a moment?
I cannot raise my hand, I think, because I'm the host, but I just wanted to mention that we do have time after the recording is done for those who might want to stay back and continue, if you want to continue when it's with an unrecorded call. I just wanted to say that.
Perfect. Then I'll add to this Geraldine's comments that moving to virtual and hybrid longer term, if we do, may well help shift the possibilities and openness to higher acceptance. Michael added, the CSCW conference has the student reviewer mentoring program. Students apply to be mentored and senior people volunteer to be mentored, or to mentor, sorry. Then there's a matching process and the student becomes a reviewer and the mentor is available to advise or comment on the review. The authors received thoughts from two minds in a single review. Could we do this in other conferences? We would need to find a lot of mentors to make this work. And Tess has added, I've been rolling this idea around in my head at Geraldine. If we eliminate the space-time constraints on paper acceptance, then what is to stop us from publishing every paper that is submitted, aside from those that make errors in their science? For example, statistical errors, errors in analysis, etc. So we currently have these questions around how do we set a standard? How do we educate and inform that standard? And then how do we ensure or secure that standard or those standards that are set? Especially when we're thinking across different cultures, trying to actually be more equitable with marginalized regions, and to help foster good relationships with emerging scholars who maybe haven't developed that thicker skin that a lot of us have had to at this point. One final comment here from the chat. Melissa has added shadow PCs to mentor people around reviewing, replace rebuttal with a revise and resubmit process. The unofficial guide is great, but it's really long and there's a lot of stuff given to ACs and reviewers to read and sort through. Also, why are we only / mostly talking about CHI and not the range of other conferences? Which, as we discussed actually in the first talk as well, and a bit in the second talk, differs region to region, culture to culture. I also really want to hear conversation about mentoring, not just reviewing. And I saw someone had put their hand up if they would like to offer their thoughts. Judy?
Hi. Yes, I think the question that Nick raised and that many people, that's really a deep question. I mean, because it goes to knowledge systems. Maybe if there's CHI, and this is what CHI is about, and now if you're a young researcher, maybe you want a northern scholar to help you to get into CHI because this is what you're aiming at. So if we're aiming at something else, we're looking at a different knowledge system. What does that mean? Do we need another conference? You know, it's kind of something that keeps me busy if we're talking about different knowledge systems. I mean, when you look at university ratings, everybody still wants to get the ratings up, but the ratings is a Western-based system. So yeah, I think you know what I'm getting at, but we don't have to discuss it now. I'm just raising that issue of how compatible is some of this.
Yeah, thank you. Tammy had added in chat, it might also be helpful to have some equity officers, as we call them at my university, who are specifically a part of AC subgroups to watch out for equity related issues, comments, reviews, etc. This would be a different role from a reviewer and someone or some group with relevant expertise in this area. And Nick, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for that, Judy. I hope you're well. So I think it's a very deep question, but I don't think it's only about knowledge systems. It's about the value systems of HCI. If we take it at a very superficial but important level, one of the conversations we had in the previous call was about some of the systemic issues, and Carl mentioned this at the beginning. So we're in a huge discipline like HCI, we have a lot of an industry presence, and we all know that at the moment this is creating a lot of issues for us. Well, it's always been there, but they're very obvious. now in all aspects of our experience with social media and what have you. And that creates a sort of a culture and a sort of set of values that young people who are going for tenure, or any people going for tenure in the States or Europe, sometimes feel they can't question that is the only way. But you and I both know that people's lives in Southern Africa are full of a much broader variety of things. Some people, as you say, would like to take those roles in the States and Europe, but they can also bring a lot of other things to a conversation about what matters and how to care and how to think about things, which is not purely about whether it's an indigenous knowledge system or whether it's a lack of connectivity in rural areas. Sometimes this is about role of family, role of religion, role of other things, all of which affect how we interact and the relationships we have with people. So yes, I think it is a very deep discussion, and I think it's a very rich and important one that we can always learn from other people. And it's not only about knowledge systems.
Great, and I think that's a really important thing to let simmer here. I've got a lot of people plus wanting a comment by Andre saying many papers have writing problems, even for people writing in their first language. However, the comment needs to be revised by a native speaker carries a harmful meaning about ownership and who is allowed to have their research published. I think it's fine to ask for language improvements, but I've seen this comment too often, and I think we should think of ways to give feedback without traces of colonialism. Stacy added, I would like to see a SIGCHI where we can publish in our native languages and produce translations into other languages. Could we have a community where expert English language skills are not a prerequisite for contributing to HCI knowledge? And seeing that we only have a couple minutes left here while it's being recorded, we'll keep discussion going after this. I wanted to turn things over to Neha and Xiaowen if you wanted to add anything to the conversation so far.
I can go first. I was just typing something. So there was a question in Slido about the times for the equity talks, and there's a complicated algorithm that has gone into figuring out the times, and I can share that in the next post maybe. But just wanted to mention that the next session is going to be at hopefully a more decent time for most of the world, and not very decent for much of the US. So that's just something I wanted to add. There's also one issue that had come up earlier, which we haven't been able to get to, and maybe we can discuss this after, which is what happens when you get a review that is problematic. And this also came up in Slido with the blog post in the SIGCOMM community. I don't know if you've seen that, but if you haven't, you should take a look at it. And actually, we had also invited the author from the SIGCOMM community to come and speak with us here. I don't know if she's still here, but that was another thing that if we have a little bit of time later, we could talk about that. So because the types of barriers that we face after we've gotten to the point of actually recognizing that a review is problematic, that process can also be endless.
Thank you. I don't have anything to add. Just want to thank everybody once again for taking the time to be here with us today. Definitely check back with us. We will post a blog post summarizing the sessions, and we will also provide more detail about our next one, which is going to be on the 9th of April on infrastructures of equity. Thank you, everybody.
Perfect. Yeah, so posted in the chat is a link to our Discord server, which includes conversations about all the equity talks and provides mechanisms for the SIGCHI executive committee to share what changes have and have not been made in response to the community's requests. Nick, I believe you still had your hand up. If you had something else you wanted to add, you may. And
No, if it was up, it was an accident. I don't have anything to add.
no problem. Neha had actually added in the comments additional issues out of awards and what is really being awarded in a paper, at least at CHI. Awards are discussed and given / nominated after the PC has seen the author names. The number regarding who gets the awards, what universities, etc., are also telling. And Sheena has added, we have discussed mentorship within the review process, but there is a question regarding mentorship beyond the review process. Who is excluded and being monitored? Those who tend to be on the margins typically do not have opportunities to be mentored or to be in the mainstream HCI. But the bigger question is, how should we mentor young scholars beyond getting a paper accepted to CHI? And do we mentor or advocate for young scholars without overburdening scholars who are non-majority / traditional in their HCI research and or identities? So I think that's actually an excellent thought to just keep thinking of, to keep dialogue going. We're ending the recorded portion of this, and we have a little bit of time to keep discussing for anyone that might like to, maybe off the record or with relative anonymity.
And before ending the recording, just to say that we have the Discord to continue this conversation and to continue to answer the questions that came up in Slido. And there's also a chance to continue some of these conversations when we talk about infrastructures, because a lot of the conversations we have had have been around infrastructures as well. And that's next Friday. And I'll stop the recording now and we can stay for some time.